don't think I have memory problems, but I do want to make sure that I've covered it. And, sometimes there's some pretty big things get left out of the mix. I'm a big email guy because email's a darn good written record of what went on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and in the age of FOIA, right? I mean, you got to have everything.
I have printed out emails to make sure that they don't get lost and put them in project files in years past because I was concerned that what was communicated to me by someone would be forgotten.
There's nothing forgettable about you, John Lenzini.
Yeah, I don't know.
Unforgettable. That is what you
see, Charlie Pride died. Did you see that of COVID?
Yeah.
That bummed me out.
I mean, it's this whole year, man. It's like I think Curtis Connolly may have posted this on Facebook somewhere. It was like, why does 2020 have to take all the country legends with it?
Yeah. Is he staying around now?
I don't know. I mean, I see him posting and like communicating stuff about being here, but I don't know if he's like permanently here or if he's like.
I mean, I was sorry to see him leave. I'm not super close to Curtis. I know his mom real well and his grandpa, Tommy Gliss. I knew him very well and thought the world of him.
How did you? I mean, you would have been doing what you're doing or in a similar form and function when Tommy was still being like really active and moving around.
Oh yeah. Tommy was a great guy. I mean, some people didn't like him because he's such a stickler for detail, but he ran a tight ship and he did some great rental property development. Some of your small mom and pop places can compete with places like the Reserve or University Village or Aspen Court, and he did.
No, I grew up just down the street, so and Grandma and Grandpa knew.
On John City, down the street from Tommy's house, or
down the street from Tommy's house. So I grew up down Neal Lane, so Hunt Road is.
Just backs up to that, basically.
Yeah, just backs up to that. So my great Aunt Dorothy had like most of that property back there. That like if it wasn't like you hit Tommy's farmland.
Was she a Hunt or a Colombo?
She would have been a Hunt, but I don't. Yeah, I think she would have been my grandpa's sister.
Okay.
Or maybe she even had a different last name from a married name. I didn't know a bunch about Aunt Dorothy. I just knew.
I had an Aunt Dorothy too. He was a real tiger. Lived to be 97 years old.
That's great. No, my Aunt Dorothy, she lived right at the intersection of Hunt Road and Neal Lane.
Okay.
So it would run down the gravel, and then you'd have Hunt Road there. And I don't know.
You really can't drive through there anymore, right?
No. So there's
kind of a private drive type of.
Yeah, so it was there. Oh my gosh, Tony Lloyd had that property there. It's got the farmhouse on it, and he generally kept that gate locked down after Aunt Dorothy passed away. And Aunt Dorothy usually kept the gate locked down, and now the gate's locked again. I don't know if it's the people that have that or something. That I know this because the mail lady came up the other day. This has been probably 4 weeks ago or so, and she was like, "Hey, I can't get around here. I would usually go through this gate, and they've got us on the software that tracks us. We can't turn around." I've been trying to explain to me all these things. Yeah. I was like, "I'm sorry, I don't know anything about the gate now." I was like, "If it was 15 years ago, I'm your guy."
Yeah.
Oh man,
some interesting people out there. Mary Nell Chu, she's very interesting.
It was funny. Just Mary Nell, seeing Mary Nell as I'm getting older, and she's the type of person that we have that. She's like, I remember when you and your baby. I'm just like,
her sons. One is a year younger than me, and the other one's about 3 years older than me. But and then I had a boss that lived across Mary Nell Lane from there, and used to actually run his mobile home moving business out of there.
Really?
Ken Marquard.
Oh yeah.
You know Jennifer.
Yeah.
Gutierrez
Jennifer's
and
that. I did drone. She wanted like some pictures for her dad for because he was going to stop doing all the decorating out front of the house, and so she had me do some drone footage of the house and pick some stuff up for him. It didn't come out great, but it was, it was something, right? It wasn't phenomenal work, but it was cool enough that I wish I could get this to work. It was cool enough that she was happy to like share it with him, and that could be his a real cool memory of it and whatnot.
Yeah, Ken was like an older brother to me. He lived across the street from us on James Street. I started mowing lawns for him before I could drive. And then I started working out at a trailer court on Park Street, and then started working for him in his mobile home moving business, and did a lot of stuff with him. Paid my way through college working for him.
Oh, the glory days when you could pay your way through college working a job.
National Guard. That's what I say now.
I mean, that's pretty much what people's options are. It's like go to the military or be in debt.
Well, my 17-year-old son, he already says they have a program now where you can go to basic between your junior and senior years of high school.
Wow.
And then you do your AIT after that. Then the point is you can go to college with your regular class, with your same high school class. I don't think that's such a big deal. My older son was actually in the Army Reserves and took their benefits, and he was an ROTC. He never finished school, though,
The folks that do ROTC and some of the National Guard. So I mean, it seems to work really well for a lot of folks.
It does, but ROTC is a huge time commitment.
Yeah,
and a lot of those guys are in both because they're trying to maximize their benefits, but it's a huge time commitment when you're doing both.
Is there one more sound thing that I got to look at here? Maybe not. All right, cool. We're there. The good thing is, John, I've been recording for like 7.5 minutes already, so we're already in there, buddy.
Okay.
For episode 34 of the WTF Carbondale podcast, the podcast where we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives and tie it all back together with this little place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois. And usually I would ask people, like, how did they come to be in Carbondale? But I'm pretty sure there were just like rocks in Carbondale one day, and then one of those rocks got split in half, and then we had John Lenzini because he is the salt of the earth to this place. Thanks for letting Gary push you out and make you do this.
Well, there's a story behind how the Lenzini family got to Carbondale. So since you brought it up, I'm gonna tell it because I think it's something that maybe a lot of families that moved to Carbondale post World War II maybe have in common. Both sides of my family are originally from Centralia, Illinois, which is, if you're not familiar with, it's a community about 50 miles north here. My father went to college during the Depression and had to drop out. Long and short of it is he ended up working for the WPA, and that morphed into basically a job with the Illinois Department of Transportation. He was an engineer with the Illinois Department of Transportation. By the time the 50s had rolled around, middle 50s, when my parents moved to Carbondale, or early 50s, they already had 4 children. And my father had not been assigned, I guess, a permanent post with IDOT, so he was given several choices, and he said, you know what, there's a university in Carbondale, Illinois. And since he was never able to finish his studies at the University of Illinois, he wanted someplace accessible for his 4 kids at the time, to go to school. After they moved down here in the 50s, and my brother Joe was born in, I believe, in 1956, and I was born in 61. All 5 of us, 5 of the 6 of us went to SIU and graduated, and many of our spouses and many of our children, too, have also gone to SIU and gotten degrees. So I think the whole story with SIU, I think is still and was back then central to the story of Carbondale.
Aw, that's cool. And like you guys, like the family has an engineering background.
They do. My dad is an engineer, or was an engineer. My oldest brother, Pete, was an engineer, graduated actually from the very first engineering class at SIU.
Wow.
Played football here for 1 year. Then he went to U of I after working in private practice, got his master's there and was an instructor at U of I. And then my older brother, Joe, also has an engineering degree and a forestry degree from SIU. My degree is actually in management. So we have a little bit of everything in the Lenzini family. My brother, Phil, graduated from the very first law school class at SIU after coming back from the Vietnam War. So he's in there with people like Judge Schwartz, Judge Lowry, who also graduated in that same class to put things in perspective for you. My sister Dorothy graduated in English and got a master's degree in English at SIU in like 1962, 63, somewhere in there. Met her husband, who's originally from Chicago, at SIU. Again, I think a theme that is very, very prevalent with Carbondale and SIU. A lot of people from Chicago move down here and stay down here. And some of them go back to Chicago and then send their kids down here later on. But I think there's a real tie to Chicago for Carbondale and SIU.
Man, that's cool. I mean, and just, so there are folks, I myself, right, I went to SIU, but I'm not like rah SIU type, right? Like I'm very much like Carbondale is my town. SIU happens to be part of this town to me, but for a lot of folks, it's very SIU forward, right? And it's kind of neat to see on your end as somebody who is, born and raised here that for you, SIU is very like forward in your Carbondale identity.
It is. And I'm a sentimental person, which makes it worse. We grew up on South James Street, so now what they call the Arbor District. And I always joke with people. I say, I grew up in the Arbor District before anybody called it the Arbor District. But we lived, a half a block north of Mill Street. I can remember when Mill Street, barely, but I can remember when it was a relatively small street and they made it into a 4-lane. But, we used to ride our bicycles over on the SIU campus all the time, play around the lake and everything else. And, we were relatively young kids. Today, I think you'd probably be arrested if you let your kid roam like we did. But we were those free-range children. But we had an awful lot of fun. And still, when I go onto the SIU campus, I still like to go around, walk around Campus Lake with my wife, and like to go through the old part of campus and stuff. When I see those old buildings, it kind of sends chills up my back.
What's it like having that institutional memory of these things? I mean, obviously the chills up the back is a very clear, you're able to access an entire life's worth of memories by standing in one spot and going, this was it in 74. This was it in 86. This was it in 99. This is it in 2010 and now. And just snap through all of that all at once.
The bad part is, though, you think, oh my goodness, I've turned into my father or my older brother who's, almost 20 years older than me. And so, it's funny because people ask stuff about, historic preservation or, and there's a whole website, I'm sure, or a Facebook page on, Carbondale history and everything else.
Yeah.
So if I'm ever at a loss for trying to remember what was in some place in Carbondale, I just phone one of my older brothers, or text them, or my older sisters and stuff. And it's funny. You take, for instance, Civic Center, where I work. That was, a commercial district, before, with places like P&N or Hirsch and Kroger. Or it was either Kroger or A&P. I think it was actually A&P was actually behind. It didn't front Illinois Avenue. But the funny thing is, here I am, I can remember being, a young kid going to, A&P or P&N Hirsch or Ben Franklin, Western Auto, all these little downtown businesses.
Yeah.
And here, 50-some years later, I haven't moved hardly at all. I'm in the same place. So, you kind of get that old codger type of adjustment, I think, when you hear yourself talk about stuff. Being
31, I'm not quite there, but I'm still partially there. I started hanging out. Well, arguably, I had my first solid food at Mary Lou's. That's where Grandpa would take on Sunday mornings. But then go from Mary Lou's as the point of focus and understanding, because that's where Grandpa would take you to breakfast, to being a preteen and teenager, riding your bike up to the Strip to hang out at the arcade downtown, to working at restaurants on the Strip, to then participating in stuff like this now, where volunteering and like engaged in the actual community development. It's like all of these things are an equation that adds up to something, and everybody kind of gets their own outcome on the other end. But you, sir, have have such a very applicable. So you talked about not leaving place, but you've still been around the world and done some things with your life. You haven't just stayed still.
Well, no, you and I think probably people get this a lot when they live in Carbondale. They get out of college, and I didn't have a plan. I'm going to tell you, when I got out of college, I didn't really have a plan. It didn't seem to matter back then either. I did the thing. People talk about working the gig economy. I guess for a while I was probably one of those people working the gig economy. I worked for a couple contractors. When I worked my way through college, working for a local landlord, cutting yards, fixing things all the time. That morphed into becoming a carpenter. Then I worked for a guy here in town, a small contractor, became a lead carpenter. Then I got lured by a brother-in-law to move out east. I actually moved to the state of Connecticut in, I think it was 1985 or 86, late 85, I think. And went out there and worked for as a contractor, self-employed contractor for, about 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. My sister actually still lives in Connecticut. And a lot of things happened in my life. I won't go into it, but basically, I had an early midlife crisis, and I was not happy with, I was a little bit burned out from working construction and chasing a dollar, and that's hard. And when I deal with small business people nowadays in the job I have, I think about that. It's extremely hard being a small business person. Yeah. It's very, very challenging. I loved being a carpenter, and really, honestly, I could have probably for years, until my body gave out, gone to work on a construction site, nailing one 2x4 to another 2x4, and been perfectly happy. There's just something about that lifestyle. It's totally different than working in an office or working for a big organization. Yeah. And and that draws a lot of young men and women too. And it drew me. And but I kind of got that pressure. It's like, why don't you go do something? I had a college degree. Why don't you go do something with your life? Why don't you get a real job? Stuff like that. and that upsets me too, because construction is a real job. And I never asked money from anybody. Mm-hmm. I always paid my own way. I'm proud of that. And I think that's another thing. And I see young people out there every day working very, very hard to put themselves through school. I see people working very hard at Walmart and fast food places and everything else. And one of the things that I like about Carbondale is there are common, hardworking people like that don't put on airs and act like they're all that. That's something for us to think about. And I think respect for a working person is a very important thing. I know, because that was my life for so long. But anyway, in Connecticut, like I say, things changed, had some issues with various things. And I know we talked about this earlier off air. The late 20s for me were kind of a rough time. I was trying to find myself. My father passed away here in Carbondale very unexpectedly. Some other things went on, and it was tough. Needless to say, I was not at the place in life at 29 or 30 years old that I expected to be. Yeah. So I woke up, and I'd been reading some books at the time. The men's movement was kind of a big issue. The author's name escapes me, but there was a book called Fire in the Belly, mm-hmm. which I read, and it was kind of shed some light on some things. And I decided, what? While I'm still a relatively young man, I like to do something different in my life. So I joined the Peace Corps. Yeah. And I joke sometimes that, I rolled over one morning and decided I joined the Peace Corps. That's not exactly true. The Peace Corps back in the 80s, when I graduated SIU at the Employment Service office they had there at the Peace Corps, at SIU, had applications for the Peace Corps. They also, oddly enough, had applications for the CIA, and which I think certainly speaks to the dichotomy of the world. But anyway, and I said, that would be really neat to do. But when I got out of college, I literally had like $50 to my name, and I had some student loan debt too. Not huge, but You know, I had some student loan debt, and I just didn't feel like it was right. You know, 7 years later, it felt right. So, oddly enough, while I was in Connecticut, you know, I applied, they accepted my application, and they said, well, you need to come down to downtown New York City for an interview. Now, I'm John Lenzini. Yeah, I've been living in Connecticut for 6 or 7 years, and I've driven on the periphery of New York City, and I've been to Boston, I've been to Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, but downtown New York City.
In what year was this?
This is like 1990, 91. Yeah.
So is this 90, like right on the cusp of Rudy Giuliani's like sanitized New York City?
Well, sort of. Believe it or not, I did not spend a ton of time there either. Okay.
Yeah, can I'll let you go here in just 2 seconds, but this is really cool connection to the podcast I did with Gregory Went just Friday, because he was in New York. He's from New York. Like, we watched 5 minutes of like downtown protest activity that he filmed in 1991. So like the connection between just having seen that 2 days ago and listening to your little hop into New York City.
There's a surprising amount of people from New York City that live in Carbondale, which is odd. But anyway, so I drove down to New Haven because I'm not driving through downtown New York, and I basically took Amtrak down to downtown New York and then took the subway, which back then it was really funny because back then the subway used tokens. Yeah. You know, and, you know, I found a subway map and everything else. And, you know, being from Southern Illinois, and the part of Connecticut I lived in was a rural part of Connecticut. So I kind of felt like, you know, to have any, like, you know, hay, straw, like, sticking out of my hat or anything, you know. It just, you real duck out of water, you know. But I found my way. And funny thing was, years later, my son joined the Army Reserves and was going to basic training, I believe it was 2014. I believe, after he graduated high school, and we took a trip out to see my sister in Connecticut. And we went down to New York City because that was the first year the 9/11 Memorial was open, and I kind of wanted my son to see it. I think there's a lot of significance with him. You know, he was very patriotic, and I wanted him to see the 9/11 Memorial. And it's a very touchy thing. It's got to be the absolute saddest thing that I've ever been to. I think that everybody ought to go there. I think every leader in our country ought to go there for sure. But anyway, when we went there, I did the same thing. We drove down from Connecticut, went to New Haven, got on Amtrak, came into New York City. And now the subway no longer uses tokens. I'm like, oh, shoot. You know, I'm like, ugh. You basically have a debit card that the machine spits out. And, of course, New York City subway bureaucrats are not real helpful with explaining things to you, you know. So we figured it out. But we basically took the subway then from I guess that's Grand Central Station or Union Station. I always get those confused. But anyway, over to Times Square. And, of course, you know, my kids, you know, relatively still young. You know, my one son's 18, the other one's like 11 or 12. And so it was a real life experience. You know, after that, we took a cab. Anyway, the debit card kind of threw me. But oddly enough, again, I found my way down there and had an interview, you know, with a real nice lady downtown New York. And it was actually very, very near the 9/11 complex. So it's funny how your life kind of comes around. But then they accepted me into the Peace Corps, and they were initially going to send me to the Congo. And it was a really neat job. I was going to be building these trails. My sponsoring agency was the World Wildlife Fund. Building trails, cabins, bridges. Of course, as a carpenter and an outdoorsman, it was great. I mean, how many times do people ever get to see Africa in their life? Well, then something changed, and they had to reassign me. So they reassigned me to Honduras. And I was kind of bummed out, but by then I'd already closed my business, sold off a lot of tools. I was working basically for other contractor friends of mine just to have a little cash. I'd come back to Illinois for several months to see my mom, do some work on her house and things like that, and get reacquainted too with Southern Illinois. You know, I'd not been on a lot of trails in the Shawnee that I used to hike when I was a Boy Scout and stuff, so it really reconnected with Carbondale and with Southern Illinois in that 3 or 4 months I was back. My brother was also starting a house. I was helping him get that off the ground. By then, I said, well, I'll take it. I need to go. I want to go. And it was funny because I'd actually started trying to learn a little bit of French to go to the Congo.
Uh-huh.
And so now I had to learn Spanish. And, I was totally SOL because I took Latin in high school.
Yeah.
One of your neighbors is actually my old Latin teacher.
Oh, yeah, I should have Mr. Mandrisky on the podcast.
You should have Mr. Mandrisky on
Oh,
the
my
show.
gosh.
And I tell you what, I loved Latin. And Dave Mandrisky was a great teacher at CCHS. We had a lot of really good teachers at CCHS, and I know that still exists today. But we had some very, very gifted, very, very engaging, very, very good teachers. And he was one of my favorite. And he obviously speaks several languages and stuff. But
a
anyway,
young
so,
David. You would have experienced a young David Mandrisky, and I
very young. He had done some time in the army and stuff like that, but he was very young, and he was very passionate about teaching Latin and the whole Roman culture and everything. And you're an Italian, I'm an Italian. My grandparents are actually immigrants from Italy, so
yeah.
My grandfather got killed in the Centrae No. 5 coal mine explosion in the late 40s, but my grandma lived on for many decades afterwards, and she always had a very strong accent, Italian accent, spoke Italian, and my aunts spoke Italian, my dad spoke a little bit of Italian. My older sister who lives in Connecticut has actually got dual Italian-American citizenship,
mm-hmm.
So Italian culture was always something that we were raised on. Every Thanksgiving meal and every Christmas meal, we still start out the very first course as handmade tortellini
mm-hmm.
in chicken broth, which
mm-hmm.
is a northern Italian dish. And so it's pretty important to us. But that was a cool thing to, the Roman history was, really neat to learn about.
Yeah.
It's also grotesque in some ways. But anyway, so I'm trying to learn some Spanish and everything else. And so, I ship out to the Peace Corps, and I can't say enough about the Peace Corps. For several years, I actually spoke to SIU people that were interested in, students that were interested in joining the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
The local Peace Corps representative would come to college. And we have quite a big, what we call RCPV, returned Peace Corps volunteer,
mm-hmm.
People in Carbondale. Sheila Simon's husband, for instance, is a returned Peace Corps. Joel Fritzler was a returned Peace Corps
really
volunteer. Yes,
huh.
He was in Africa. So I always tell people, I said, hey, don't wait until you're 29 years old. Okay, there is nothing. For instance, my first job when I did get out of construction, when I graduated from SIU, was selling insurance, door to door, no less. Okay, in '83,
is that how you learned how to talk, John?
Well, in '83, the economy was not that good, and it was difficult to find a job. Your other jobs were assistant manager at like somewhere like Foley's or J.C. Penney's. It was rough, and none of those things really appealed to me. And I think I took the insurance job out of a slick sales promotion by their company. But anyway, I told them, I said, look, there is nothing about your first job out of college that you cannot miss to go to the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
Okay. It was that thing that changed my entire life. Okay. There's nothing like going to a third world country like Honduras where people have nothing. And Honduras is the second poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti, just to put things in perspective for you. And, years later on, when you have so much talk about immigration and the Trumpism and everything else going on, people like Donald Trump and many other politicians, many other people and pundits and everything else, they need to go down there and they need to live that experience, okay? For two reasons. We have a lot of international impact on countries, especially in Central America and South America, okay? And many times our effect on those countries has been adverse. We've used those countries to help us make money and everything else, And I'll tell you what, the Honduran people are the friendliest people in the world. They're the nicest, most pro-American people there are on the face of the earth. Wonderful people, okay? Wonderful people, hardworking people, law-abiding people. And the portrayal that many of the people, the human beings that was portrayed by Donald Trump is so unfair. It sickens me because he doesn't know what he's talking about. But to call people that you don't know liars and thieves and murderers and rapists is, And again, I'm sure that very same thing can be applied to the people from Mexico that immigrate here, legally or illegally. I have many friends, Latino friends from various countries. And again, I think the portrayal by Trump was bad. But the Peace Corps was one of those things that really opened up, because I hadn't had, a lot of cultural diversity. Obviously, growing up in Carbondale, you have a lot of cultural diversity, more than, say, DeSoto.
Yeah.
Okay? We had university professors living on James Street that were from many countries and many races, many backgrounds, which was great. And my father was always, and my mother both were always very open to our neighbors and young, old people, grad students. That's something that's really beautiful in Carbondale, I think. And it was something that I think always my parents enjoyed, because as they got older, they had young people living around them that, continued to make them feel, part of a more youthful society. But, that's a thing with going abroad and living in another culture, for 27 months, learning another language. I mean, that is such a big deal. I tell my wife all the time, I met my wife while I was in Honduras. She's a Honduran native, Sylvia. Love her with all my heart. Great wife. Been married over 27 years. And it was funny because when we started dating, I always tell this story. I spoke very little Spanish. I literally had been there about 2 weeks when I met her at a fiesta that they were having in the community, in the training community where I was at. And she spoke no English. And, of course, many people that know me say, yeah, well, that's probably a good thing. So that was interesting. But, it was a great thing. And sometimes I tell Sylvia, I said, you know what? I went down there to save Honduras. I think Honduras saved me. I went down there and I worked hard, but, you go down there and like I say, you live in a country that poor. I had no car for 27 months. I used to ride an old bicycle, an old black, like 3-speed bicycle that somebody gave me. A total pile of junk, but I used to call it my caballo negro. Well, that means my black horse in Spanish. And it's a very common type of bicycle down there. And in Honduras, the machete is everything. It's like your Leatherman pocket tool here. You see the most inventive uses for machetes in the world, in the third world. And most of the time, people don't even carry them in a sheath. The machetes they carry are very long, and sometimes 3 foot in length on the blade. And they're very sort of wobbly or flexible, so they weave them in between the frame of the bicycle to carry them. And this is a very common thing. You see it all the time. So, when in Rome, do as a Roman. So when in Honduras, do as Hondurans. So I went out.
I can only imagine a job.
I bought this machete, and I'm fair-skinned, and Honduras is a very hot country. It's really beautiful climate, but it's pretty hot. So I had this kind of like canvas cowboy hat, and I tried to dress like a Honduran, and I was actually teaching building trades down there. So I was teaching, how to put foundations in right and lay blocks and reinforce them correctly and put on roofs and, all this stuff. We built some furniture, everything else. It was a lot of fun. But I lived in the very first house after the bus stop in this little village called Guanchillas, Santa Rita. And that's, in case you want to look it up on the map, that's in the state of Yoro, which is in the northern part of Honduras. So I would ride in. We were building a house for one of those guys who basically, he was pretty well off, so he paid these kids that I was teaching to do building trades a little bit of a stipend, and we were building a house for him. And it was a pretty good project. You had to get pretty inventive down there. The sponsoring agency that was working with me was not probably as helpful as it could have been. Definitely not like what the World Wildlife Fund would have been in Congo.
Yeah.
So anyway, I would ride into, about 2 kilometers away, I would ride in on this old black bicycle with poor brakes, and I'd cruise through the bus stop, and all the people hung out in the bus stop, that were waiting for the bus, or kids, or, young adults with nothing to do. They'd hang out in the bus stop till the wee hours of the morning sometimes. So, I'd ride in, and, sometimes people would mess with me because, I was the only gringo in town. And, people call you gringo all the time. Some people have a hard time with that label. They find it offensive. But they would say, hey, that's a hot bicycle you got, or something like that. And I said, you mean my caballo negro? And I'd whip that machete out and wave it around in the air. And chase the kids, so they had the best time. that, and there's a lot of other stuff. Like I say, the machete is like everything down there. You can slap it on the side of a concrete block house and it will ring like crazy. So that was a lot of fun. But and I got married halfway through my term. So my wife lived in this little dusty village of Guanchis with me for a year in a small concrete block house, 2 bedrooms. We did have running plumbing after I put it in, and concrete floor, no carpets, very little furniture. And she had been living in the capital city, and she was actually in medical school.
Uh-huh.
So she made substantial sacrifices to hang out with this gringo. So, but it was a really good experience. So I tell anybody today, if you're thinking about joining the Peace Corps, join the Peace Corps. It was great. And then, after I came back, we actually had to return to Connecticut because that's where I'd disembarked from. And we spent, about a month there. And we had actually come back one Christmas to Carbondale. And by then, my mom was kind of elderly in her mid-70s. And, my dad had passed away. And, we discussed it. And we decided to move back to Carbondale then. And that was in late 1993. No, I'm sorry. Is that right?
Your ballpark,
94,
94.
somewhere in there. What the heck? But anyway, somewhere in the 90s. And by then, Carbondale had changed quite a lot. And I don't know if I was homesick or what, but, after living in Honduras, obviously, and after living in Connecticut, for quite a few years, you come back and things seem a little bit different to you somehow. There had been, some development built up. And like I say, I kind of missed it. In Connecticut, there's no national forest or anything. The access to public grounds there just is very little. People think, oh, well, you go to the beach and everything else. Yeah, if you can find a public beach. It's much different than if you go to Florida or Texas. I will say at least the beaches are more public there. In Connecticut, that's not really the case. So I think some of that kind of maybe affected my decision and stuff. So we ended up, moving back here. And I worked for, construction for a short amount of time and then worked for a manufacturer here in town actually for 6 years before I ended up with the city. So.
Did you just apply and that was that?
Yeah, I basically applied out of desperation because I had my wife.
Here we are, years and years later, out of desperation for you, John Lenzini.
Well, I think it sounds like I feel like Odysseus in the Odyssey, but I had basically I wasn't happy at my old job, and I basically quit one day.
Yeah,
gave him 2 weeks' notice and said I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. They
Yeah.
tried to hire me back, and I did not want to go back.
Do you want to say who it was that you
No,
were?
I don't want to say who it was.
Okay.
My wife, at the time, we only had one child. We had a nice little house. I mean, we were stable enough economically. My wife had a job at the Jackson County Nursing Home.
There you go.
And so, we were okay. And then, I saw this job come up for a housing rehab specialist in a newspaper. I said, I'm going to apply for this. And the guy that ran the department, ran Building Neighborhood Services at the time, was Morris McDaniel, who, oddly enough, lived 2 doors away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And, we'd been living there for a while, so, he knew what kind of person I was, and I interviewed for it. And I also had done, even before I moved to, or even when I was in Connecticut, I'd done a lot of volunteer work for Habitat for Humanity, among other things. But I was really big into Habitat Humanity and was for several years when I moved back to Carbondale. I was a site supervisor, and I was on their board for several years. Mm-hmm. So, my heart was really in it and was the whole time I did the job. I loved the job. But I had no plan again. If they write my autobiography, it might be John Lenzini, the clueless one. But it's strange the way that things take you and fate takes you. I always tell people, whether you believe in God or Allah or Jehovah or whatever higher being there is, that's cool. I'm fine with it. I believe in God, and I believe in fate, and I believe that sometimes God drops things in front of you, and if you're too dumb to take notice, then it's your fault. And I've been very fortunate. I don't want to be dismissive of that. I've been very fortunate in life. My life has taken some strange turns, but I've been very fortunate. And So, I eventually, I just worked my way up through the city of Carbondale. After a couple years in housing rehab, I then, was a building inspector, and I loved that job. And then, I moved up to the supervisor of the division. And it's, code enforcement is a different world. It's a tough thing. Yes, it's some technical knowledge, but it's also the biggest knowledge is how to deal with people. And, the funny thing is there's no, they can send you to training classes and everything else, but and the reason I try and really keep my inspectors involved and keep them happy and keep them employed is because a lot of that just goes with being on the job. It's just that thing that you can't teach anybody. You really have to get in there and learn it. And it's tough. And I had some growing pains. I definitely had some mistakes and things like that. And so, I try to give, the benefit of my experience to younger people, because a lot of the people that are, that getting hired into my division as inspectors or planners or whatever are younger than I was when I started. I was 39 when I started with the city.
Yeah.
So, the things that you can do in a factory or do on a construction site are much different than what you can do within City Hall or when you're dealing with the public. Mm-hmm. And Tom Grant, who's currently a city council person, was one of my first supervisors, and him and Ted Mealing shed a lot of who had the housing specialist job before I did, shed a lot of light on things. I think it was Tom that said, don't forget who you're working for. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important when you work in city government. Don't forget who you're working for. You're working for the citizens. You're not working for your own beliefs. You're not working for, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're working for what's in that code book. You're working for what the city council has passed. It's a democracy. They run the show. You put their intentions into actions. So that's an important thing. No, and you also take care of your citizenry. One of the things recently done that I'm very proud of is we had a problem up on North Washington with parking. I won't get into the details, but you got some commercial properties conflicting with some residential properties. We'd gotten a lot of complaints from citizens not being able to park, not being able to get their mail because people were parked in front of their mailbox. And we passed around a petition last February to get a neighborhood parking permit program set up, which was already in the code. And we have several of those parking areas around town. Mm-hmm. And I was very proud that we got that in front of council, and the council voted to enact it. And it went under some discussion. One of the things one of the council people say, which I think was a valid comment, was, is this something that city staff initiated? Or was it something that came from the citizenry? Well, it came from the citizenry. Citizenry wanted it, okay? And then obviously after signing the petition, I think it became more clear after talking to people that, that we felt we were being responsive to what the citizenry wanted and working within the guidelines of an existing code. And we followed all the things by the book on that. And I think the community will benefit from that action. But that's a good illustration of what I say, and don't forget who you're working for, There's a lot of great people in Carbondale. I wholeheartedly believe that in every section of this town. And I used to joke even back when I was just a building inspector, my goal in life is to know everybody in Carbondale. Uh-huh. Right now, I'm only up to like 80%.
Well, that's what happens when you're in a transient turnover community, buddy.
Yeah. And that is an issue. But there are a lot of great people in Carbondale, and Carbondale, that's what makes Carbondale is the people here. Yeah. Carbondale, it takes a lot of flack and for being Carbondale.
For just being Carbondale.
We're not Centralia.
Yeah.
Thank God. We're not Marion. We're not Murfreesboro. We're Carbondale. We're not Anna. We're not DeSoto. We're Carbondale. And we should be proud of Carbondale. We should be proud of the multiculturalism. We should be proud of having a university. We should be proud of having hippies. And we should be proud of having a music scene. We should be proud of having churches and mosques and a synagogue and a Hindu temple. We should be proud of that, okay? And here's a story for you. Like I say, both sides of my family were from Centralia. So almost every weekend, especially in the summer, we had to make the trek up old Route 51 to Centralia. right? Place which really, after several weekends, you've seen it all, and you really don't need to be there every weekend. But we go up to see my grandparents and do some chores around their house and stuff like that. So I'll never forget, I'm bored one day, and I'm out in front of my grandma Spray's house, downtown Centray, and this kid rides up on his bicycle, and he's like selling ice cream cones or something, you know. So I buy one off him. I'm bored. I'm sitting out there on the front steps basically doing nothing, you know. And he says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Carbondale." And now, granted, this is like in about 1970, 1971, maybe even earlier than that.
Uh-huh.
And he goes, "Oh, Carbondale. Oh, that's where all those hippies are from." So when I point out hippies as part of the description, that's kind of a thing that sticks in my mind, you know. And so, you know, if that was back in 1971, you know, and that was the impression, you know, I'm sure that people view Carbondale as a kind of a different place, kind of maybe a hippie place, maybe a liberal place, whatever. You know, and I'm fine with that. You know, Carbondale needs to be Carbondale.
Yeah.
Carbondale, you know, needs to do its own thing. I think the city council too is very good in representing that myself. And again, that's difficult too with all the politics and everything going on now. And I'm sure we even see it in the, you know, in the way people think about the COVID virus and everything else. You know, communities have their own character.
Well, and that's what I was laughing about just a couple minutes ago when you were kind of talking through stuff and the notoriety and some of these things that come along with you. Have you gotten any one-off text messages or phone calls from people since that post to the group a couple days back?
No, you know, it's really funny because I've always put my cell phone number, and that is a city cell phone, by the way. So
that's not your personal cell phone. All right.
But you know, I mean, and there's two kinds of people in the world, Nathan. There's people that are their job.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, you know, they got their family life and everything, but their job is very important to them.
Yeah.
And that's the way I was raised. My dad's job was very important to him. I think every one of my brothers and sisters, their job is immensely important to them. I have a sister. My sister in Connecticut is she's a Navy veteran. She was a Navy officer. Mm-hmm. She's the one sibling that did not go to SIU because SIU did not have a nursing program. So she went to St. Luke's Hospital nursing program in St. Louis, and then joined the Navy. She's a Navy Vietnam era veteran, okay, and an officer, and you know, did a 4-year stint in the Navy, and saw a lot of guys come back from Vietnam pretty banged up. My brother also, and I want to say I'm very proud of the veterans in my family. My brother was in the 1st Infantry Division in the Vietnam War. He actually dropped out of SIU and enlisted to be in the Army and wanted to be in the infantry. My father was actually a World War II Navy vet, and my uncle Adolfo, his Italian name was Adolfo, but obviously when you're in World War II and Hitler's name is Adolf, you don't want to use Adolfo or Adolf. So the only time I ever heard anybody call him Adolf was as a joke, but he always went by Adolfo, which they cut the off the front. But he was actually a 1st Division Army veteran and kind of the family war hero, him and my brother, because he went in on D-Day and was wounded. And my brother was wounded in Vietnam too. So it's very important, and Carbondale and SIU do have a very, very big veteran community. But again, you know, she then made a career out of nursing. My sister Mary, and she's you know, one of my idols. Very hardworking gal. And she just retired, or is just actually now retiring at the age, well, I won't tell you, she's in her early 70s, okay? And not one of the, she's head of a visiting nursing agency in New London, Connecticut, basically. Not working because she needs money, but working because her job is so much who she is. My job is very much who I am. So when it comes down to handing out my business cards or my cell phone being on that card, I tell my inspectors the same thing. Hand out business cards. Have people contact you. Get to know the people in town. Get to know those anchor people in the neighborhood, the people that you know that you can trust, okay? If you need to find out some information, okay? if you need to see what's going on, if they've got a complaint about something that you didn't see, okay, we need to know who those people are. So when that card, and this, by the way, Nathan, this is the second time my business card has been put on Facebook this year.
Okay? What was the first one?
The first one, I won't go into detail, but it was a certain gymnasium, let's say.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And, that was back in late spring. And the comments then were very much different than what you saw on Facebook this last time.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that says something about people now maybe taking the coronavirus, more seriously than what they were then.
Well, I think it also says something to the effect of how serious we have taken it from the get-go, much in part to professionals and mindful politicians like yourself. You're on the professional side, but, Mayor Henry and the council and everybody, taking the right steps and saying, we're taking the coronavirus seriously from day one. That's it shows consistency on your end and city policy leading the want of the people out front as well.
Oh, I definitely agree. And again, it's a good example of why I say Carbondale needs to be Carbondale.
Yeah.
If people want to portray us as a more progressive, even maybe possibly a little bit more liberal town, I don't think Carbondale personally is all that liberal. But I think if respecting human rights, and I think if respecting people's way of life is liberal, then if the shoe fits, wear it. Be proud of it. We should be, because we're going to be vindicated, okay, especially in the virus situation with our actions, and I think council and the mayor and the city manager have done the right things, with that. I know that they're frustrated. I know that they want to do more. And again, as I said earlier, the small businesses, I don't want to be hardened to their plight.
Yeah.
They have a tough time. They had a tough time before the coronavirus. It's not easy to be a small business person in the state of Illinois. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of taxes, okay? The state is having some problems. In Carbondale, it's even compounded by the fact that SIU, for whatever reason, has had a downturn. It's had some issues. Some of it might be demographics. Some of it might be politics. I really don't know. I'm really not that smart of a guy, okay? But there is an issue, okay? And those are all factors when your student population goes down basically 7,000 people in Carbondale in 10 or 12 years, that's 7,000 less people that are going to eat at a restaurant, okay? Especially a small mom and pop downtown. And, every week I try and eat, especially before the virus, I tried to eat at a downtown restaurant, and not just go through the drive-through at Burger King or McDonald's or go home for lunch, okay? Because I think that we should support our local businesses as public servants, okay? So, that's a difficult thing, and I know the council thinks about it. I know the mayor. The mayor's a small businessman. I know he thinks about it, and I know the city manager does. We have tried very hard. Our economic development director, Stephen Mitchell, is a very, very good, hardworking guy, and he's tried his best, I know, to help people with coronavirus relief for small businesses, paycheck protection plans, and things like that. So, we're doing all that we can. But we do try and play by the rules. We do try and play by what the governor's guidelines have pointed. And I think that we will be vindicated. This is a serious thing. 280-some thousand people have died, okay? And, I know a lot of people that have had it. And while I don't know people that personally have died from it, I do have friends that have lost friends because of the COVID. And again, if Carbondale wants to be portrayed as progressive or intellectual, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think being called a science believer and an intellectual is a bad thing. Okay, So I think that we just need to be comfortable in our own skin.
Because we can look around us and see what the outcomes would be if we were more laxed, right? We're experiencing outcomes with us doing as best that we can right now. But there are places where you see the outcomes with them not doing so, right? And what the difference is, and what the numbers would be like here if we were much more loose in saying, no, we don't really need to abide by these restrictions. We don't really need to think about the science behind wearing a mask and, airflow through a building and social distancing and all of these different components. We're just going to let it ride, right? It would be a much more painful environment we're living in right now.
I believe so. And with our citizenry being so mobile anyway, that's that makes it more difficult.
I'm astounded at how well SIU has done through this. We have gotten lucky. It has not been perfect, right? We've still had plenty of folks that are students or on campus or the basketball team or whatever else catch COVID, but comparable to other university settings around this country just as well, we're nowhere near the same problem positioning that some of these other places are, where thousands and thousands of students are getting it, and they're not much larger than we are in terms of size.
Well, and I know for a fact that some of the disbelievers who, I'll never forget, a friend of mine stopped. I was mowing the lawn at my church downtown. I won't plug my church, but
you can plug your church if you want.
I can do that.
Yeah, plug your church.
Go First Christian Church. Okay, I won't say the home of the real Christians, but I mow the lawn and take care of the yard up there, and have for a long time. I'll never get somebody stops. Yeah, we were just over at a baseball game in Heron. Nobody had any masks on or anything else. Blah 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 blah. And sure enough, several months later, one of their family members came up positive. Okay. Now, obviously, it was not in relation to the sporting event, but my point is that may be what it takes to make people believers, and that's sad.
Yeah.
I think in many ways that obviously the politicization. I don't know. You help me out on that word there, Nathan. I should have had more coffee before I came, but that is sad. Okay, it's very, very sad that politics has to be a part of this whole public health nightmare.
Yeah.
But I think that something that you're going to find, there's going to be a lot of social changes due to the coronavirus, and I think that hopefully people will look again at things like Obamacare. It always tripped me up why people were against Obamacare. Okay, Obamacare had protected people. I think they were upset sometimes because they had to pay the penalty for not getting insurance, or it made them get insurance or something else. But you know what? You take into account all of the small healthcare providers, right down to your private doctor, who in some cases are small business people. A lot of those people were not getting paid because clients would skip out on them. You would think the Republicans and conservatives would be all over that as a good thing.
Yeah.
That now we're going to ensure that healthcare providers continue to do things like practice health care in rural communities like ours, okay, because they know that they're going to get paid. And as you know, it's very hard. If you've tried to find a general practice doctor lately, it's pretty hard, okay? And that says something about about the whole healthcare system and the economy of it. So that's a slant. I think that the pandemic is also going to shed some light on. I was actually heard this on. It was touched on a little bit on a news show. I can't remember which one I was watching or listening, maybe to NPR. But here we are in 9 months. We've been able to come up with a vaccine for the coronavirus, and yet we still have no vaccine for HIV/AIDS. Okay, and so I think that people are looking at a little bit of that. Is the HIV/AIDS issue not being dealt with because of politics? Because it's a disease. It's something that's by and large related to homosexuality and drug use. Is that why we don't have a vaccination or a real cure for it? So I think that the coronavirus is going to shed some light on things like that. It's also going to shed a light again on the economy about things like people working from home. Okay, about doing remote learning And in schools, I have a kid in high school. I did not send him to school.
No.
Okay.
No,
He is remote
absolutely.
learning, and
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I tell you what, man, I've been really impressed. You know, we're lucky because we have twins, right? So it's easier when the twins kind of have each other to work off of and to follow the same course of school. But they're flourishing, right? This is a fit for them to just hang out at home and work through the computer and still have a social interaction through the video, but then have like separate mindful time. I mean, you think about some kids that, my biological son has autism. And while we've not gotten my stepson diagnosed, it's like the same things that I understand in Mason, I understand in Zachary, right? Like I can apply these things from child to child. And it's like when you remove them, or she's got ADHD that we address. You remove some of these classroom stimulations, and you allow kids to both have that social stimulation for part of it, but also to remove themselves, to separate their mind and to organize their thoughts. And all of a sudden, wow, their ability to flourish is set. And kids that may otherwise struggle in school can now have better success at it. And it's just the fact that we live in a world where everybody needs their own individualized way to learn.
Well, that's true. It's hard though, and I realize, again, I feel very blessed in life, and I'm sure you do too. We have a lot of advantages of having things like computers and internet access and everything else. And I realize there are a lot of families that are struggling with that. But again, the safety factor of sending kids back to school is I think an important thing. Yeah. I realize it's a socialization of being at school. My son is a very social guy, and like his dad, and it's tough for him. But he's managing. I got to say, the kids have really stood up. And my wife is a high school teacher in another community, and I want to say, it's the teachers too. As part of all the political thing, I think they took a lot of hits too, very unfairly, in my opinion, about kids need to go back to school and blah 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 blah. I guess, but you know what? Those teachers are and janitors and cooks and everything else and administrators, they're all getting an increased risk of exposure. Mm-hmm. Say what you want to say, and this is true, I think, in everything nowadays. Again, being in a place where we frequently are the target for everybody's slings and arrows on the face of the earth, or at least in the community of Carbondale, code enforcement's an easy target. We don't carry guns, tasers, Nerf,
you're not the violent
pepper spray, stuff like that. We're out there, and by God, we just had to get by on our brains and our good looks, But I think people. One thing I see, and again, maybe some of it's the virus, maybe some of it is the election, but people have really lost a lot of their sense of civility. Okay, in the world. Not so much in Carbondale. I'm proud of my town. I think that really, to be honest with you, the people are still pretty civil in Carbondale. There's still people who are pretty decent. Obviously, and one of the things too with the whole thing that was posted this week on WTF, I want people to understand that when we go talk to somebody, whether they've not mowed their grass or there's litter in their grass, or it's a high school kid, a college kid with 40,000 red Solo cups in their front yard from the party the night before, or a restaurant that's serving inside, we still try to treat those people with respect. We try to talk to them. We try to get them to understand why this is a code in the first place, or an ordinance in the first place. Okay, and we're not the Gestapo. We're not police. Okay. We're not the FBI. We're not the health department, okay? We're kind of the catch-all that does everything that's spilled over the edge of all those agencies. Yeah. It still needs to be dealt with, The comments to me on WTF were kind of funny because, to be honest with you, yes, we've issued a lot of notices. We've issued very, very few citations. Some of the citations, too, have come out of places like the city attorney's office, which I got to say is a very, very good office. We have some very, very talented people in the city attorney's office that are also trying to do the right thing, okay? But if I was as bad a dude is I was made out to be on WTF a couple times now, or on Facebook, I should say. One of the posts I don't think was on WTF. Man, they would be making a series of movies about me like Rambo or something.
Here's what's interesting to me about this, John, and I'm gonna say one thing. I'm gonna transition out on another one, because you go in and you treat people with respect. People get more angry at that because it's more difficult to demonize you when you come in and you are simply applying code, but also treating people with respect, right? It's hard to really attack somebody when they are both respectful and just following the rules in something like code enforcement. So that's where I can see some of that additional rage coming in. You're too nice of a guy.
Well, I don't think I'm too nice of a guy either. I talk to my wife and kids. I'll probably straighten you out on that. But and that's, again, something learned. Again, this was not me. Boy, when I was, you needed to know me back about 17, 18 years ago. I mean, I could be a real, I'm going to say it. Hopefully this is not going to get you in trouble.
No, we can curse on the show. You're
okay,
good.
all right. Well, good, because you really need to put a curse jar over here because you could retire on that joker. But I was a real smart ass.
Yeah.
Because I thought I needed that. I thought I needed that tough macho stuff, I thought I really needed that to do my job.
Yeah.
Okay? And, and we have gone through training about de-escalation and everything else. And, one of the things I've learned is that, I really don't have to be that way. I can still go up there and it takes a lot of guts to stand toe to toe with somebody, and look them in the eye and tell them straight out what's going on and not stammer or stutter or be afraid. You don't know. You could knock on that door. You could be somewhere in a crummy neighborhood and you could have an axe murder on the other side. You could have somebody shoot you through that door, Again, people want to criticize the police nowadays, but they can't fathom the difficulty of their job, okay? And I've done a fair amount of time with the Carbondale police. That Spanish came in handy many years later, and I was actually tapped to be a translator for many, many times. And while I was never placed in a life or death situation, I did get to see a lot of the seedy underside of society in that, A lot of the translations that I was doing was actually for child abuse cases, things like that. Sometimes with DCFS in there and stuff like that, and other things as well. But you really get to see some disturbing things. So, there's that aspect to it. And somebody was saying the other day about, my guys were doing something and they were saying, make sure they don't get hurt or something like that. And I said, to be honest with you, I'm way more concerned about what's on the other side of that door I'm knocking on than picking up a filing cabinet.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's the aspect. And hopefully that when I've tried to build a reputation with BNS and try to get some name recognition out in the public. Again, goes back to handing out the business cards and having your cell phone on the business cards and having your name on your shirt and your name on the car and things like that. Trying to know that when that car pulls up, we're not here to give you a hard way to go. We're here to clean up your neighborhood. We're here to deal with the situation. Okay, and when I'm talking to people in their neighborhood about their trash or the way their house looks, I try and, express upon them. This is your neighborhood. Okay, your kids are living here. Your mother's living here. Your wife is living here. Okay, if it benefits anybody to straighten out your property, it's you. Okay, all right. So we try and deliver those messages respectfully, and that's the same thing that we do, with any kind of COVID requirements. Okay, but it is a serious thing.
Do you think that personality is part of why you're taking that next step?
I don't know, really. I'd say fate is the reason.
I'm just stuck with it.
Again, fate has interrupted my life, and I'm not going to sail off happily into the sunset in the exact same role for the next 6 years that I've had. So.
Is that your countdown to retirement is 6 years now?
Probably. I will, I know I only look like I'm, probably 35, but next month, basically a month from today, I turn 60 years old.
Holy cow, fella.
And, you say you're 31. I mean, come on, I got power tools older than you. I'm quite sure I have clothing older than you.
It might be the underwear you're wearing right now.
Well, I hope not. No. You go through different stages in life again. Like I say, my life has been kind of a journey. And I think that a lot of people that you talk to, I'm sure if you talk to Mary Henry or Terry Bryant or many other people, notable figures in public life or professional life, our buddy Peter Gregory, for instance.
Go.
Okay, there's a guy.
How many times he's leveraged? Oh, we can take care of this. I'll just go talk to John Lenzini. Yeah. We used to play baseball together. That was always his shtick. And I was like, listen, Peter, it doesn't matter whether you played baseball with John Lenzini when he was a kid or not. John Lenzini's going to treat you just the same.
Well. And I love Peter. His enthusiasm is infectious. And he's the exact kind of guy, that makes Carbondale.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I don't know if this show is probably way before your time, but there used to be a show about this little town in Alaska called Northern Exposure.
Uh-huh.
You ever seen that? It's kind of an off-the-wall type of thing, but sometimes I kind of think like that. But, Carbondale is full of characters, and it always has been.
Uh-huh.
There's a guy down there on the corner of North Wall in Maine, dancing around in a colorful costume on a corner. Well, some people would be just so like, what is that? Well, I don't know. You tell me what it is. He's not doing anything wrong. Maybe he's just out there livening up people's lives. I mean, he's not doing anything wrong. It's just Carbondale.
Yeah.
And so, and I kid too. I say, one of these days, I may leave my employment early and start printing, keep Carbondale weird bumper stickers and selling them and make so much money I don't even need to work anymore. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think Carbondale is weird, but the fact of the matter is we do have our very own culture, our own character that makes it a place that I see. And I see all the time on Facebook and social media. Like, for instance, one of the groups I'm very big into is the Southern Illinois hiking page with Sean Grossman, which is really cool. And you see a lot of people talk about how beautiful Southern Illinois is and that draws them here. Hey, I just moved to Carbondale. I was reading some post last night. I just moved to Carbondale from Utah. I don't know anybody, or my husband and I don't know anybody. And the outpouring of people that would respond to them is like, hey, we can meet up for a hike. We can do this. If you need help, this. There's people looking, for help because their house burned or because they're having a tough time. The outpouring of love and support for people, to me, is a really great thing. Mm-hmm. You see it in the food banks that we run, in the warming center. I know you just had Carmelita on the show, a marvelous person.
Yeah.
Things like that really, really restores your faith in humans. And again, while things happen like the marches, against, police brutality or whatever, or against Trump or whatever that we had this summer, those were fine. People were nonviolent. I know there was a little bit of fuss, when the Trump rally drove through. But, for the most part, people expressed themselves. They did it in a nonviolent, way. I thought the police reaction to them was very, very good, which made me very proud of my friends that work for Carbondale PD. I'm going to get out another plug. I plugged my church. I'm going to plug Stan Reno.
Plug him.
Okay? Our interim chief, and for a long time our deputy chief, Stan Reno, great guy. And he's the kind of person that needs to be in that job. And I might get in trouble for this, but I certainly hope that they name him the permanent chief. Carbondale Police, it's a hard time to be a police officer right now. I have a son that's, he's a corrections officer. It's not a real easy time to be a corrections officer. I have a son that wants to be a police officer. And it's a very difficult job. And with the politics, and again, there's a lot of talk about defunding the police or reorganizing the police or something like that. you know, again, after my experience with translating with police, and then also, you know, sometimes we do activities with police enforcement activities. It's a tough thing to be a cop, you know, in any place. And I think Carbondale PD's done a really, really good job of doing things the way they should be done, you know, without an abuse of force and things like that. Are they perfect? No, I'm not perfect either. I actually made a mistake like back in probably like 1986, you know. But the fact of the matter is, you know, we've got to sit down and we've got to talk to each other. We've had some community forums. I know right now they're doing a 5-on-5 forum with the public, and we've got to continue those kind of communication things, okay? We've got to find a common ground. We've got to find ways to work together and to live together in this community for the overall good, okay? It doesn't mean that we need to be Stepford wives or we need to be programmed robots and all follow the same political line or anything else. But we do need to think about what's going to make this town better. Reducing crime, economic development, job creation, a good, livable, clean, safe community. I think those are all things that anybody can get behind, okay? How we do it? Well, that may be, you know, a little bit different thing, but I think that we all need to look at that common good. And I tell people all the time, and we talked about this earlier, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. If your house looks like a dump and you've got abandoned cars in the front yard, or the paint's peeling, or your lawn's overgrown, or your trees are grown up into the house, your gutters are falling off, you're part of the problem, okay? All right? You're part of the problem. Fix your place, okay? Because I don't want to be over there telling you, I shouldn't have to be over there telling you to fix your place, whether it's your own house, your commercial property, your rental property, okay? I shouldn't have to tell you not to blow off that stop sign or that light. Get a grip, okay? Act like a responsible member of society. And there's just so many things like that. You know, when you're at the grocery store, go pick up an extra bag of canned food and give it to that food pantry, okay? Go down there and drop some money in that Salvation Army bucket, you know? Tell that cashier at Walmart or at the drive-thru at McDonald's how good a job they're doing, you know? Maybe even leaving them a tip. Because I'll tell you what, during the pandemic, people like that have had a rough time. And I think, I think people in some of those jobs, there's very little respect for the working people nowadays in a lot of cases. You know, those people are over there working hard. Those people that drive through restaurants and other restaurants, carry out Pagliais, Quattros, all these places, you know, they're working hard. And they deserve just some common decency. You know, and I think that's something that you know, would go a long way here and everywhere in the world.
Common decency. Like to end these on a lesson, and there's no better one than what John Lenzini has shared with us in this podcast, episode 34 of the WTF Carbondale podcast. God, it's just, these are the people that we live with. These are how much they care about the people around them. And you're one of them just the same. Have a good one, whatever that one may be.